Hey, welcome back to the channel. Today's video is going to be a really good one. This is probably the #1 question I get from online course creators. How do I structure all the ideas that are going around in my head into a learning journey that leads to a transformation? If that's you, stick around. We're going to dive into that today. And to make sure you don't miss another one of these videos, please subscribe to this channel. We'll be putting out one of these every single week. All right, let's dive in. Right, so today we're going to cover 4 different things. First of all, we're going to talk about crafting your transformation. Then we're going to talk about signposting your journey. Then writing great learning outcomes. This one is so important to everything above it. And finally, planning your programming. Let's get into it. Okay, so the starting point for all of this is your ideal student profile, the avatar that you can help. You've got to be very clear on who that is. And it's worth spending a bit of time writing down who they are, where they're from, what do they want. And this is key because crafting a transformation is about connecting what the student wants with what you believe they need. That's what we're going to be covering today. So getting very clear on what the want of the student is a #1 priority. Once you have this ideal student avatar in mind, we then craft the transformation. So the way I think about this is you need to answer the question, what do you want the student to be able to do differently at the end of your course? So it's very much an action-oriented statement. There's usually a verb in it. So for example, one of the courses I used to consult in, Part-Time YouTuber Academy, the transformation in that is to be able to consistently publish YouTube videos on your channel. That's it, right? There's a lot more that stems from that, but that is really the core of what Ali Abdaal is teaching in that course. So what do you want your students to be able to do differently at the end of your course? The #1 thing you need to know about your students is what level of prior knowledge do they come in with. This is backed by research. The only thing you really need to know about your students that affects the way you design that course. So now you've got your starting point, that level of prior knowledge that the student comes in on, and you've got the transformation. And your job next is to connect the dots between those two. And this is where signposting your journey comes in. So signposting is about identifying the milestones in the journey from prior knowledge that they come in with to transformation that they're going to leave with. Now, a couple of important caveats here. This doesn't have to be linear. There could be a map of all the different things that they need to cover, and they could go in a lot of different directions to be able to cover everything that needs to get covered for them to make that transformation. So definitely think about this in 3 dimensions as opposed to one linear 2-dimension journey. This isn't to say that it can't be linear, but when you think about learning as a lifelong pursuit, then you're going to want and encourage your students to keep coming back and exploring that map that you've created for them. So I find this one of the best ways to think about it. All right, cool. So once you've got that map sketched out, what you want to do is make a nice, beautiful visual to signpost that for your students. The way I like to think about this is you want to show them where they are now, where they've been before, and where they're going next. And you want to remind them about that at every single milestone. The reason this is important is that your students are going to have a whole bunch of ideas and notes and learnings that they're documenting about your course, and they're going to need somewhere to hang all of that. So you give them the map in which to do that. Your signpost will become one of the most cornerstone elements of your course. Okay, so you've got your transformation sketched out and you've got all these milestones along the way. Now, all of these things, the transformation itself as a macro goal and all of the milestones as sort of micro goals along that journey need to have really good learning outcomes. This is so key because every piece of the design that you're going to put into your course going forward comes down to that learning outcome. So how do we write kick-ass learning outcomes? I like to use the SMART method. Many of you may have heard of this, so let's just quickly recap it and then talk about how it applies to online courses. So SMART stands for specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, and time-bound. So how does that apply to an online course? Here are a few questions I like to ask course creators when thinking about each of those categories. So for specific, have you described the learning outcome in as much detail as possible? Let's go back to the example of a YouTube channel. If the outcome was to publish videos on YouTube, that's pretty broad, right? That's pretty, I don't really know exactly what you mean by that. But if the goal is by the end of this course, you will have published 4 videos on your YouTube channel and have a system to publish consistently every week, that's a lot more specific. So that's what you're shooting for in this first one. So how will you know that the learning outcome has been achieved? If a learning outcome was have more confidence on camera, that's pretty hard to measure, right? Like how do you know if someone has confidence? You gotta ask them. Pretty subjective. But if it's something like record a speech and publish it on YouTube, and let's make it even more specific, 5 to 7 minute speech and publish it on YouTube, that gives you a much clearer sense of confidence, and it's also something you can measure, right? You can see that that person was confident enough to be on camera, put together a 5 to 7 minute video and publish that on YouTube. So this is what we mean by measurable. All right, number 3 is attainable. And this is really just getting at, is this something that can actually be achieved? Right? Is it a realistic goal? So if we keep using this example of publishing YouTube videos or essays, so if the goal was to publish a 5,000 word essay every week versus Ship 30 for 30, which many of you may know, which is to publish an atomic essay every single week. That's a lot more attainable than a 5,000 word piece, which takes often weeks of research. So that's really what we're getting at here. These should be stretch goals for sure, but make sure that they are reachable with that big stretch. Right, relevance is just, does this tie into the transformation of your course? So if you go back to the previous step, when we mapped out the milestones to be able to get from where they start to the transformation that they end with, is this goal that you've set, this learning outcome, a relevant outcome along that journey? This is where beginner's mindset comes in, and I will do a whole separate video on this shortly, but what the whole principle here is do the leaps from milestone to milestone make sense? Often as an expert, you're subject to the knowledge curse. There's actually a scientific study around this, and it's called the earned dogmatism effect. And basically what that is as an expert, you make leaps of understanding and you have certain assumptions and you have intuition that isn't clear to people on the outside. And so as a teacher, you have to be really explicit about what the links are between the milestones in your course. And sometimes that means actually adding milestones in between to uncover things that you've taken for granted. And finally, the last one is time-bound, which is just to say, what is the deadline? By when must this be achieved? This is so key. If you refer back to my video on the 3 Ps of TOCs, the prompts to action are such an important part of a course, and especially in a cohort-based course, which is a bit of a learning sprint. You want to make sure that people are completing the assignments on time because your assignments should be building on each other. And so having a clear deadline when you want that to be completed by, so that people can get feedback on it, publish, or whatever the case may be, to be able to then move on to the next step, so key. So just to quickly recap all of that, SMART learning outcomes mean that they are specific, they are measurable, they're attainable, they're relevant, and they're time-bound. Right, so how do we tie all of this together into a course? This is the final step where you now take your learning outcomes at the atomic level. I'd like to call that the lesson level, and you've got these all leading up, right, to the outcome for the overall course or the transformation that you're promising. And you start to break out in 4 categories, answers to the following questions. Why is this important to your students? Why should they care? What's in it for them? What are the relevant concepts? frameworks, mental models. Avoid trying to show relationships between these. Just identify, define what these concepts, frameworks, and models are. Then go into how. How is where you start to bring your experience and expertise to the fore to show how the concepts you introduced in the what relate to each other. What cumulative pattern recognition can you start to share with your students so they can start to see the connections between the concepts you've introduced? Use tons of examples here, and this is best done in a live setting where you can open it up for facilitated discussion between people. What you want to do is start presenting the concepts in new contexts, and then give your students as much practice as possible doing that, so that when they see a brand new context, they know how to apply the concepts you're teaching. And finally, what next? Answer for them, what should I be doing next? If you can give them a specific instruction of what to do next, that's your prompt to action. And that's what you want them to be doing to take action, to actually learn by doing. So we're answering why, what, how, and what next. And once you've got that mapped out, there are infinite ways of presenting and delivering that information in a way that includes your students. I'm going to have a lot more videos on the student experience as we get more into this series on weekly learning. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe to this channel. Please include any comments below. I respond to all of them, and I will see you next week.